I've been asked, only by a couple of people, why do I use A.D. and B.C. when referring to dates in my videos instead of C.E. and B.C.E.? Well, I was brought up with A.D. and B.C., and you know what? They always seem to work fine for me. Yes, I did know what they mean. That's before Christ and Anno Domini, which is Latin for Year of Our Lord. And yes, I was also aware that those are Christian. But you know, it never occurred to me that this was a problem in any way. It certainly didn't occur to me to be offended. If I heard someone say AD 1342 or whatever, how was that aimed at me as an atheist? Surely I imagined when I was listening to him, he's just trying to tell me about the year that he's referring to so that I understand him. And I understood that, and it was never in the slightest bit offensive. Indeed, I've never heard of anyone's being offended by anyone using BC or AD. In fact, I can go further than that. I can't even imagine anyone's being legitimately offended by these things. I can imagine someone perhaps who was very politically correct being offended on behalf of somebody else, in case somebody else is offended. But has anyone ever actually been offended for themselves? I mean, if I were, well, I am an atheist and it doesn't offend me, but if I had a different religion instead of no religion, would it offend me? I can't see why. It's just an agreed 0 point that's very common, and it's used in the West and has been for millennia, and it hasn't caused any problems so far as I know. So it seems that using a different term is solving a problem that doesn't exist. And by and large, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. It's quite a good maxim, actually. But there are other reasons that I don't use BCE and CE. Well, one is that they're more difficult to say, as I think I just exampled. I really had to stop and think hard to articulate them. They also sound very similar to each other. And so one might imagine that if one's trying to carry on with the conversation, perhaps during a mortar attack, that there's some potential for confusion. Sorry, what was that number 2? Chief Sunray, because come in, I can't hear you. Did you say BC or BCE? Please repeat. Say again, Big Sunray. It could cause hopeless confusion and anarchy and possibly military ruin. So that's another reason. They sound too similar. One is also slightly longer in that it's 3 letters rather than 2. And that little extra moment every time I type a script or something. Okay, I don't type script, but if I were to type scripts, then they would take just that little bit longer to do, particularly as I would probably bother with the little full stops in between, because I have standards. So it's a problem that doesn't really exist, and it's an annoying solution that doesn't actually work anyway, because what is the common era before common era to which these initials refer? Well, it's exactly the same era, isn't it? It's the birth of Christ. Well, now, of course, we don't know whether Christ existed at all, and even if he did exist, we don't know exactly when he was born. So, yeah, it's a notional, just traditional, accepted 0 point, but it's one that works perfectly well. Everyone's been using it for ages, and everyone knows exactly what it means. And if you change to different letters, then suddenly, as apparently in school textbooks now, they've started using BCE and CE. So now when children come across AD and BC, they're going to start getting confused, and all the old textbooks are going to start going out of date for no good reason. Now, I've come up with an alternative, which I think is superior, which I shall present to you now. Instead of changing the letters, what we do is we simply change what the existing letters, BC and AD, stand for. This way, everyone can just carry on using the same letters, everyone will know what everyone else means, no one will have any even conceivable excuse for being offended, and you won't have to change any of the old textbooks. Brilliant! It's win-win-win all round. Although it isn't quite, as I'll explain in a moment. Anyway, think of it. The year 99 BC is before the year 98 BC. So you're counting backwards as you approach 0 from the past. So the chronology is backwards. So that's backwards chronology, which is BC. Okay, now after the year 0, then you have ascending, advancing dates, AD, you see, because the year 2 is after the year 1. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4 in ascending order. So we have backwards chronology and ascending dates. Excellent, BC and AD. So now that's what I mean. If you're someone who thinks that someone somewhere might somehow be offended or confused by my saying AD, now you don't have to be, because you can say, ascending dates, I know exactly what he means. And we're all using the same 0 point anyway, so there's no change there. It's brilliant. Well, perhaps I shouldn't say that, given that it was my idea, but it, I suspect, won't work, because it doesn't actually tick any of the boxes required of a politically correct solution to a problem. Not that there was a problem in the first place. You see, it doesn't require anyone to change their behaviour. That's annoying, you see. If you're a politically correct person, you're going to get a kick, a power trip out of forcing other people to change their behaviour. But this solution means that no one has to change behaviour. And so then how would you know that you've exerted power over them? So you don't get the power trip. So that's one problem for politically correct people. Another problem is that you don't get to be outraged, because when some dinosaur says AD, you won't actually know whether he means advancing dates or ascending dates or Anno Domini. So you won't know whether to be outraged or not. So if you fly off the handle into a frothing rage, it might seem to be a bit unreasonable. And so you won't get the joy of being outraged by anything. So that's no good. So that's another major box that's not ticked. And you won't know that if anyone's being outrageous or offensive. Isn't it terrible not knowing whether to be offended or not? And again, that's no good for a politically correct person. But worst of all, of course, is that you don't get to police the system. You see, if you hear someone say AD and you go, I think you mean CE, you won't be able to correct them and demonstrate by this your social superiority. So you won't be able to police the system. There'll be no system that even needs policing, no social superiority, no moral high ground you can grab. It's just for the politically correct person, it's a lose-lose-lose situation. But for everybody else, I think it's a win. The term January has never offended me. Does it offend you that the month January is named after the Roman god Janus? Or January, February, March, April, May, they're all named after Roman gods. So is June, of course, after Juno. And September, October, November, December, which means 7, 8, 9, 10, they are actually the 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th months. So their names don't even make sense anymore. But there's an interesting story to that, because August and July are named after Julius and Augustus Caesar. And of course, they shunted everything along a bit in the calendar when they had their months created for them. And that's also why they both have 31 days. There's a lot of interesting historical stuff about the Roman calendar, which we still use today. And it's totally non-offensive. It's mildly interested if you're into that sort of thing. But is anyone offended? Christians have happily been using January for the first month of the year, Janus, the god of new beginnings, for millennia, and it doesn't seem to have been a problem. They even call the time when Christ got crucified Easter, which is an old Saxon goddess, and even that didn't seem to bother them for millennia. So, well, for a millennium and a half. So, you know what? It's a non-problem. But I have a solution, which I don't think anyone's going to use, because the people who weren't offended in the first place won't have to bother, and the politically correct people who want the new solution won't be satisfied by it. Hey-ho.